They thought I would stay quiet forever. For years I cooked, cleaned, and smiled, while my son-in-law treated me like a servant in my own home. But this Christmas, when he announced 25 of his relatives would invade my house, I looked him in the eye and whispered, "Perfect. You can all starve, because I won't be here." In that moment, his smug grin disappeared, and for the first time, he realized I wasn't afraid. I had a plan, and the surprise waiting for him would turn his perfect holiday into a memory he'll never forget. Before I begin, tell me where you're watching from. I want to know what city, what state, maybe even what country you're sitting in while hearing my story. Because if there's one thing I've learned in 66 years, it's that people everywhere understand injustice, and what happened to me was nothing short of injustice. I wasn't just ignored. I was treated like a maid in my own home. My son-in-law believed I was his personal servant, and for far too long I allowed it. My name is Margaret Callahan, though everyone calls me Maggie. I live in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Cincinnati, in the same two-story house where I raised my only daughter. For decades I worked as a nurse, the kind of job where you give everything of yourself. Long shifts, sleepless nights, tears and sweat. I built my life around caring for others. And yet, when I retired, when it was finally time to rest, I found myself caring for one more ungrateful man, my daughter's husband, Brandon Mitchell. Brandon is 38, a slick real estate agent who hides behind polished suits and empty promises. To outsiders, he's charming, successful, the kind of man who sells houses with a wink and a smile. To me, he's a parasite who latched onto my daughter Laura and decided my home was his playground. From the moment he stepped through my door as her fiancé, I felt the shift. He'd say, "Margaret, could you grab me some coffee? Margaret, this floor looks dusty. Margaret, the chicken is a little dry," as if I were hired help instead of his wife's mother. Laura, my sweet girl, tried to ignore the way he spoke to me. She's 35, a high school English teacher with a heart too soft for this world. She wanted peace in her marriage, so she turned away from the disrespect I endured. I don't blame her. Love makes you blind, and fear of conflict makes you silent. But with every passing year, his commands grew bolder, and my patience grew thinner. I told myself I was preserving family unity, but in truth, I was sacrificing my dignity. The breaking point came in early December, just as the air turned sharp and neighbors began hanging Christmas lights. Brandon stormed into my kitchen unannounced, his cologne overwhelming, his arrogance suffocating. He wore that smug grin I had come to despise. "Margaret, I have the most wonderful news," he declared, sliding into my chair as if it belonged to him. "My entire family will be spending Christmas here, only 25 people." He emphasized the word only, like 25 guests were a minor inconvenience instead of an army. He leaned back, listing names with the confidence of a man assigning chores to his staff. Aunt Carol, Cousin Ryan, Uncle Dennis, his brother-in-law Paul. Everyone was coming, and according to him, I would cook, clean, and serve them all. He didn't even ask, he assumed, as if I were invisible, as if my time, my home, and my body existed solely for his convenience. I smiled faintly, but inside, something snapped. He had no idea what was coming, because this time, I wasn't playing the maid. When Brandon made his announcement, I felt the walls of my kitchen close in on me. For 5 years, I had been living in a silent storm, bending and breaking under his arrogance, convincing myself that keeping the peace mattered more than defending my pride. I remembered the first time he dismissed me with a careless wave of his hand, as though I were staff hired by the hour. It had been a small insult, easy to ignore, but small insults have a way of becoming heavy chains when you let them pile up. I carried those chains through birthdays, family dinners, and holidays. Brandon would invite his clients over without warning, leaving me scrambling to cook elaborate meals while he poured wine and took the credit. I watched him boast about his perfect home, his perfect wife, his perfect life, while my sweat and labor held the illusion together. Even then, I stayed quiet, believing that my silence kept Laura's marriage intact. But silence doesn't build unity, it builds resentment, brick by brick, until the weight threatens to crush you. That December morning, watching him sprawl in my chair and announce the arrival of 25 guests, I felt the final brick drop. He listed names like he was reading from a script: Aunt Carol, Cousin Emily, Uncle Dennis, Nephew Ryan. Each one was another demand I had never agreed to. He wasn't asking, he was declaring, Margaret will cook, Margaret will serve, Margaret will clean. My identity reduced to a series of chores spoken aloud. He thought I would panic as always, rushing to please. He was wrong. I looked at him carefully, noticing the shine of his new watch, the smug tilt of his head, the way he treated my kitchen, like his stage. He believed he was untouchable, that I would always bow to his plans, and perhaps that's why my words startled even me. I said, "Perfect, let them all come." His smile widened, not realizing that beneath my calm voice lay the spark of a storm. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet strength I had buried for too long. Brandon mistook my composure for compliance, but what he saw was the beginning of his undoing. He went on bragging, describing how the Mitchell clan would fill every corner of my house, how it would be the grandest Christmas yet. I let him speak, nodding faintly, all the while planning my response in silence. For once, I wasn't afraid. I had endured years of servitude, disguised as family obligation, but now I was ready to reclaim what was mine, not just my home, but my dignity. And if you followed me this far, don't look away. The real story hasn't even begun. What came after would turn Brandon's perfect Christmas into chaos, and every detail of it is worth hearing. So stay with me until the end, because the surprise I prepared for him is one you will never forget. After Brandon left that morning, slamming the door like he owned the hinges, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by silence. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and yet everything felt unbearably loud. My hands gripped the counter until my knuckles whitened. For years I had carried the burden of his arrogance quietly, believing patience was a shield. But patience had turned into chains, and I realized that if I didn't act now, I would be swallowed whole by his demands once again. I walked into the living room, my eyes tracing the family photographs on the wall. There was Laura as a child, grinning in her Halloween costume. There was my late husband, Patrick, smiling proudly at her graduation. There was me, decades younger, standing in front of this very house. Each frame reminded me that this home was built on my labor, my sacrifices, my memories. And now, Brandon dared to transform it into a stage for his ego, a backdrop for his endless charade of success. The thought of 25 Mitchell relatives crowding these rooms churned my stomach. I could almost hear their chatter, smell their perfumes, see their careless footsteps dirtying the floors I had polished. I imagined myself rushing between the stove and the sink, my back aching, my dignity shrinking with every dish I washed. No, I told myself firmly, not this year. My voice echoed in my chest, soft but steady. For the first time in years, I meant every syllable. I would not be his maid. As I sat down, my mind wandered to the woman I used to be. I had been a nurse for 30 years, tending to patients who sometimes cursed me in their pain, who sometimes begged for mercy with eyes full of fear. I never faltered. I gave them strength when they had none left. If I could face sickness and death with composure, why was I cowering before a spoiled man who couldn't fry an egg without supervision? The realization burned through me like fire. I wasn't weak. I had only forgotten my power. That night, as darkness wrapped around the neighborhood, I lay awake in bed. The wind rattled the windows, and the scent of pine drifted in from the Christmas tree downstairs. I thought of Brandon's smug grin, of the way he listed names as if reciting commandments, and I felt a strange calmness settle over me. I had made my decision. There would be no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. My revenge would be quiet, deliberate, and unforgettable. He would learn that even silence can roar when wielded with purpose. Before I tell you how I planned it, let me ask you something. If you were in my shoes, would you have done the same? Or would you have surrendered again for the sake of peace? Leave your answer in the comments below. I truly want to know how others see this. Because sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought behind closed doors. 2 days later, Brandon found the envelope I had left on the kitchen counter. I had gone for a walk through the neighborhood, my scarf wrapped tight around my neck, when I heard the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. From the corner of my window, I watched as he strutted into the house like a king returning to his palace. He saw the letter, tore it open, and his expression shifted from amusement to disbelief in a matter of seconds. I heard his voice boom across the walls as if volume could erase my decision. "Margaret, what is this nonsense? You can't just leave during Christmas." My guests are expecting a celebration." His words echoed like commands, not requests. He stormed through the rooms as if searching for me, his anger swelling with each step. For years, I had trembled at that tone, mistaking it for authority. But now, I stood steady, watching from the staircase as his composure cracked. Laura entered moments later, groceries in her hands, her eyes wide as she saw Brandon clutching the letter. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious. Brandon turned on her with frustration. "Your mother thinks she can abandon us. She thinks she can just walk away from family obligations." Laura's gaze darted to me on the stairs, searching my face for answers. I said calmly, "I am not abandoning anyone. I am protecting myself." Brandon's mouth opened, but no clever reply came out. The silence that followed was thick. Laura set the bags down, her shoulders tense. She had always tried to keep the peace, but even she could feel the shift in the air. I looked at her directly and said, "Laura, I have given everything to this family, but I will not be treated like a servant in my own home." Brandon scoffed, shaking his head, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty behind his arrogance. He was realizing, perhaps for the first time, that his control over me was slipping. He tried to laugh it off, pacing the kitchen like a salesman rehearsing a pitch. "This is ridiculous. You'll regret this, Margaret. Hosting Christmas is your role, your responsibility." He was desperate to reframe the narrative, to make me doubt myself again. But my resolve didn't falter. I remembered every night I had spent cleaning up after his guests, every morning waking to piles of dishes, while he bragged about his perfect home. Those memories hardened my voice. "No, Brandon, that responsibility is yours now." And if you're listening to this, take a moment to hit the like button, because standing up for yourself, no matter how late in life it happens, deserves recognition. Every click, every small act of support, is proof that silence doesn't win. And trust me, what unfolded after that conversation will show you just how fragile Brandon's empire of arrogance really was. Brandon did not surrender easily. After his initial outburst, he shifted tactics, lowering his voice and adopting the practiced charm that had sold countless houses to unsuspecting buyers. He walked toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Margaret, you're overreacting. No one thinks of you as a maid. You're the heart of this family." His words were sugar-coated poison, designed to lure me back into submission. Once, I might have believed him, but that morning I saw the manipulation for what it truly was. Laura sat quietly at the kitchen table, her hands folded, torn between loyalty to her husband and love for her mother. She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but she didn't speak. I felt the weight of her silence, the same silence that had chained me for years. Brandon leaned closer, his voice dripping with feigned sincerity. "Think of the children, Margaret. Think of the joy you'll bring everyone if you just do what you always do." He underestimated me. My patience had been spent. I answered firmly, my words cutting through the room like glass. "I have thought of the children. I have thought of the joy. But I've also thought of the exhaustion, the disrespect, and the way you treat me as invisible unless you need something." Brandon blinked, caught off guard. He hadn't expected resistance, not from me. He was accustomed to obedience, accustomed to seeing his will carried out without protest. The crack in his confidence was small, but I saw it. And once you see a weakness, you cannot unsee it. He straightened his jacket, forcing another laugh, trying to regain control. "Fine, go on your little vacation," he said. "But when my family arrives and there's no feast, no decorations, no warmth, do you know who they'll blame? You." His threat hung in the air, but I refused to let it settle. "Let them blame me," I replied. "I would rather carry their anger than carry your chains." For the first time, Brandon's smile faltered completely. Laura covered her mouth, hiding the gasp that escaped her. The silence that followed was more powerful than any argument. Brandon had thrown every tool at me: anger, charm, guilt, threats, and none had worked. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Control. It was subtle, quiet, but undeniable. My heart didn't race with fear, it steadied with resolve. I turned away from him, signaling the conversation was over. My steps were calm, my back straight. He could rage, he could sulk, he could plot. None of it mattered anymore. My decision was set in stone. If you were in my position, what would you have said? Would you have surrendered to keep the peace, or would you have drawn the line as I did? Share your thoughts in the comments. I want to know how others handle battles fought within the walls of their own homes. Because sometimes, it's not the loudest fight that defines us, but the quiet stand we finally take. The days that followed were quiet on the surface, but beneath that stillness, tension brewed like a storm cloud refusing to break. Brandon avoided me most of the time, though I could hear his voice carrying through the phone as he tried to reorganize his grand holiday plans. He whispered to relatives, telling them not to worry, promising that everything would be handled. Yet I noticed the sharpness in his tone, the way his arrogance began to fray at the edges. Laura, caught in the middle, hovered between us like a ghost in her own home. She asked timid questions at dinner, her fork barely touching her food. "Mom, are you sure about leaving?" she asked one night, her voice soft. I met her gaze steadily. "Yes, Laura, I am more certain than I have ever been." She nodded, but her eyes glistened with fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what my defiance would unleash when Brandon's family arrived. As the date crept closer, I made deliberate choices that unsettled Brandon further. I stopped stocking the pantry with his favorite wines. I didn't bake the pies his family adored. I let the house stand plain, with only a simple wreath on the door. Brandon noticed, and one evening he confronted me. "Why aren't you preparing? Don't you care about appearances?" I answered. "Appearances are your obsession, not mine." His jaw tightened, and for the first time, he had no retort. He tried to rally Laura to his side, urging her to convince me. "Laura, talk to your mother. Tell her she's being unreasonable." She stayed silent, her hands trembling in her lap. I looked at my daughter and spoke gently. "Laura, I am not punishing you. I am teaching him that I will not be erased in my own home." Her lips pressed together, and for a moment, I saw the spark of recognition in her eyes. She understood more than she could say aloud. Each night, I packed a little more into my suitcase. A sweater here, a photograph there, a journal I had neglected for years. The act of preparing felt sacred, like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been buried under Brandon's shadow. He noticed the suitcase by the stairs one morning and scoffed. "You're really going through with this?" he asked bitterly. I answered without hesitation. "Yes, and when you host your empire of 25, you will do it without me." If you believe in setting boundaries no matter how others react, make sure you subscribe right now. Because what comes next isn't just about Christmas, it's about reclaiming a lifetime of dignity. And you won't want to miss the way arrogance crumbles when confronted with quiet, unshakable resolve. Christmas Eve arrived with skies heavy and gray, a fitting canvas for the storm about to unfold. I zipped up my suitcase early that morning, the sound of the teeth clicking shut like a final verdict. Brandon hovered nearby, pretending not to care, but his restless pacing betrayed him. "You're really leaving?" he asked, his tone more disbelief than anger. "Yes," I answered, "today." His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. The silence between us carried more weight than shouting ever could. By noon, the first of his relatives began to arrive. Cars filled the driveway, laughter spilled through the air, and voices echoed down the street. I stayed upstairs, unseen, listening as Brandon greeted them with exaggerated cheer. He boasted about the grand celebration, his voice rising like a salesman pitching a dream. But beneath the surface, I knew panic simmered. There was no feast waiting, no decorations beyond the bare wreath, and no willing maid to clean up after them. I descended the stairs once, suitcase in hand, just as Aunt Carol embraced Laura. The chatter froze when they saw me. "Margaret, are you heading out?" someone asked. I smiled politely, steadying my voice. "Yes, I have plans of my own this year." Brandon's face reddened, his jaw clenched, but he forced a laugh. "She's just joking," he told them. "She'll be back in time for dinner." I met his gaze and said clearly, "No, I won't." Every head turned, every whisper began. Laura stood frozen, torn between her husband's collapsing performance and the truth radiating from my voice. Brandon tried again, his words sharp as glass. "You can't leave us like this. My family is expecting tradition." I placed my suitcase by the door and replied, "Then you should have respected the person who carried tradition on her back for 5 years." His family shifted uncomfortably, the air thick with tension. They were beginning to understand what kind of man he really was. I left quietly, stepping into the cold air. Behind me, I heard Brandon's strained laughter falter, followed by the hurried shuffle of relatives, realizing the illusion had cracked. The house that had always been mine now belonged to his chaos, and I didn't look back. For the first time in years, I walked away with my spine straight and my dignity intact. My freedom wasn't loud or dramatic. It was silent, deliberate, and absolute. And silence, I realized, was the sharpest revenge of all. By the time I reached Elaine's cabin, the world outside was wrapped in snow, quiet and serene. The stillness felt foreign after years of noise, demands, and footsteps that never respected boundaries. Elaine welcomed me with open arms, her small firelit home a sanctuary from the storm I had left behind. She poured me tea, and for the first time in decades, I felt like a guest instead of a servant. My shoulders loosened, my heart steadied. Freedom tasted simple, yet unforgettable. The phone rang twice that evening. I let it buzz across the table before I answered. On the other end was Laura, her voice strained, carrying the chaos of my old house. "Mom, everyone is upset. Brandon doesn't know what to do. There's no food, nothing prepared. They're arguing." I listened quietly, letting the silence stretch before I answered. "Laura, now you see what I've carried alone all these years." She didn't respond immediately, but the tremble in her breathing told me she finally understood. Later, I received another call, this time from Brandon himself. His tone was sharp, layered with desperation he tried to disguise. "Margaret, you've humiliated me. How could you walk out like this?" I waited a moment before replying, my voice calm. "I didn't humiliate you, Brandon. You did that to yourself the moment you treated me as less than human." The line went dead after a pause, his pride unable to withstand the weight of truth. I didn't regret a single word. Christmas morning, Elaine and I shared a modest breakfast by the window, snowflakes drifting lazily outside. No shouting, no footsteps demanding my attention, no orders disguised as family requests, just peace. My phone buzzed again with messages from relatives, some angry, some apologetic, most confused. I put the device face down and focused on the warmth of the fire. For the first time in years, I wasn't rushing, I wasn't serving, I wasn't invisible. I was simply Margaret. The days that followed, word spread among the Mitchell clan. Some judged me harshly, others admired my courage. But the truth didn't require their approval. I hadn't staged my rebellion for applause. I had done it for survival, for dignity, for the woman staring back at me in the mirror each morning. My absence had been louder than any speech I could have given, and I knew Brandon would never again see me as the mate of his empire. If this story resonates with you, leave a comment and tell me what part struck you the most. Was it the moment I finally said no, or the peace that came afterward? Because in the end, this wasn't just about Christmas. It was about reclaiming a lifetime of respect. And perhaps, if my story sparks even one person to draw their own line, then silence has finally spoken loudly enough.